Everyone. I'm Josh. I get to preach today. Again, right after Brian, again. My oldest had a sleepover last week for the first time, my oldest daughter, for the first time in her life, and it was sleeping over at a family who goes to church here. And we asked them, well, are you going to be at church the next morning so we can pick up our daughter? And they said, are you kidding? It's Brian's first week back. Which brought to mind for me, I'm preaching again right after Brian. Because the last time I preached was right before he went on sabbatical, and then it was me. And like I said last time, that drop-off is very steep. It is very steep. It is junior varsity, JV. Let's go. Brian actually resents those comments. That's not true. None of us actually feel that way. You might, But the truth is, we're going through Colossians. We've been doing it for some time now, and the awesome thing is that it's been preaching by committee, which is there's a whole team of us. We've never done this before, but we're studying the Bible together, passages together, weeks in advance, and then one of us takes all of those ideas, perspectives, and voices, men, women, people from different professions, countries, all of it, and then they preach. It's been incredible. So now it's my turn, and I'm actually really, really excited. We do, when we come here, go through verse by verse, word by word of the Bible because we believe that it's actually, as the Bible will say, the very breath of God, that it's actually His words. There's this point where Jesus is, I'm going to just dive right in. There's this point where Jesus' disciples, a lot of them leave. They depart from Him. And he turns to the 12 and he says, do you want to go also? A beautiful moment where Peter says, where else would we go? You have the words of eternal life. And we believe that. So with that in mind, I wonder if you'd stand with me as I read the passage that we're going to talk about today. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through the psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him. You can have a seat. Jesus, help me to show your words. Speak to us. Help us to believe that they are the words of eternal life. Help it to not just be information, but that it might somehow make us deeper apprentices, disciples of you. Amen. Amen. I'm going to jump right in. Colossians 1 and 2, we're all about how amazing it is, the story of God's rescue. Paul gave a bigger view of Jesus in Colossians 1 than any of us have ever had. And then he recounts how amazing it is that we've been rescued. And in chapter 3, super hard pivot, he turns to how to actually live as if these things were true. It's this whole chapter is just how to. And I get the verses today that are how to do relationships. How does knowing Jesus actually change, this is for you and for me, change the way that we do marriage, we do friendship, we do parenting, right? We do even being a son or daughter. That's what Paul's going to do today. How to be in relationships because we know Jesus. And he starts with the principle that Brian introduced last week that I love. Paul says, be who you actually are. He instructs you to be who you are. This is what he says in verse 12. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. My youngest daughter's name is Goldie, okay? If any of you encountered Goldie, okay? Goldie is very sweet. Her name's Goldie. She has golden hair, which is very lucky. Because if she had come out a redhead or a brunette, that would have been a total crisis, right? We need to rename our youngest child. Goldie is the youngest daughter, which means she's the princess, right? The rules are very different for the youngest golden-haired child in our house, okay? And right now, we're learning all these lessons about relationships, unfortunately, because conflict is huge in our home right now. Hey, by the way, Goldie actually cut her hair this week with scissors, her bangs, right off. Front bangs, gone. She's not admitted to it yet. okay? What haircut, okay? This is Goldie, okay? Well, this week, there was a conflict happening in my home, and somebody got hurt and runs out of a room with a big cry. I can't even catch the child, right? They go gone and screaming, right? I'm like, oh man, someone got kicked in the face again. And it's obvious that Goldie is the culprit, okay? Because she's the only one left in the room, okay? So I go into the room, and I have to put on my least favorite parenting hat, the investigator hat, right? Okay, who did what? And then you said what? And then who kicked who in the face? Like, I hate that hat. The facts never align. They never align, right? It is an exercise in futility. Well, I go in there, and I can't find Goldie. And Goldie's hiding from me, right? Because she knows she did wrong. And she's up in her bunk bed under the covers. And I go in there, and I say, Goldie, I start my thing, what happened, And she won't even look at me, and she says, I don't want to tell you. And she's crying, big tears. I don't want to tell you what I did. And then she says some things that I've never heard from my child, which this is one of those moments as a parent, you go, oh, something new is happening here. And she said, I feel like you should send me away. She said, I'm the worst. And what did I do? I reminded her who she really is. I said, you are not the worst. Goldie, you are the best. We delight in you so much. You are so fun and creative and kind. You are the best. This is what God constantly does with us in the scriptures. This is what Paul does here. He starts it. He says, therefore, guess what? Therefore, because of you are chosen, holy, and dearly loved. I can't tell you the amount of Christians that these words seem to just bounce off of. They might even say the gospel to other people, but when you try to tell them, God actually chose you. He sees you with delight. You are dearly loved. They feel like it might not be for them. Do you believe this? This was such good news to the Gentiles in Colossians, that they themselves were a part of God's family, that they were chosen, holy, and dearly loved. And that's what I was trying to just tell Goldie. Do you believe that? Now, he goes on to say, be who you are. This is who you are. And he says, be it with one another. How? In verse 12, he says, clothe yourselves with compassion and kindness and humility, gentleness, and patience. Now, there's so much here. I could do a word study on every single one of these words and talk about what it actually looks like. The next verse is what brings it all together. But I want to point out, these are things we can put on. It's clothing. So he says, clothe yourselves. We can choose to put these things on. But the next verse helps us describe who we are and how we might do these things. There's a lot of content here. I'm really going to zoom in and focus on verse 13. I want to take you there. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Paul begins his conversation with relationships with the idea of harm, of grieving one another. When you are hurt by someone, when you encounter a ruthless world, when there's been a real hurt, wound in relationships of love in your life, forgive. Not if, but when, okay? All of us, every person in this room or listening, has been hurt by other people. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. In counseling, because I'm a mental health therapist, I've met with a married couple that's felt so unseen by one another. And as the years have built up, felt the distance so widen that when I've met with them, they've honestly said, I just feel so much resentment and hurt from this person across from me. I met with the daughter who was treated as lesser than her older sister when she was growing up. She was often told by her mother, it's because you're harder to love than your sister. And now as an adult, she's had to grapple with the idea, am I lovable? Am I harder to love than other people, or am I even lovable? I met with a set of grandparents who have been hurt by their son who believes that he had his life ruined by them. And now he will no longer talk to them, have any correspondence with them. And he's had kids, and they've never met their grandchildren. And they feel so heartbroken and hurt by their son. I've met with many marriages who have had to walk through the incredible pain of affairs. And how can you put back the pieces together when the greatest possible heartbreak has happened? And anyone that's grown up in a home raised by sinners, because every person in this room is a sinner raised by sinners, has had to grapple with having very real wounds. In life, nobody comes into adulthood unwounded. And if you think you do, chances are you really haven't faced your wounds. Just here to encourage you, right? They say that children are pre-neurotic, okay? It's why they love you for free. It's because they haven't realized how much you've messed them up yet. It's not a matter of if, right? If we're messing up our kids, it's just a matter of how. Because we're sinners raised by sinners. And for those of us that have had wounds, had harm, that pain, if ignored, and I know some is great, right, and some is small, right? My Goldie kicking someone in the face, that was very reparable, right? But some of us have very great wounds, and that pain, if ignored or denied or hidden, it remains, it forms us, and it grows. It does not just go away. So the question is not, how will we get through life without harm? It's, do we have a very real model to be healed after inevitable harm? Do we? And that's where Paul starts here. That's where he starts with being grieved. So as humans, we all have, everyone in this room, things that we have done which have harmed and wounded others that we need forgiveness for. And we have had things done to us that somehow we have to have real, genuine inner healing for through forgiveness. So Paul says this. He says, bear with each other and forgive. But what does that actually mean? What does that mean? I just want to say this concept of forgiveness has been highly misunderstood. It is a nuanced teaching in the scripture, not a simple one, and often it is misunderstood. So I want to just focus on what forgiveness is and what it's not. And I want to start with what it's not, okay? What it's not. The most common conception of forgiveness that we have is actually forgive and forget. Okay, many of us grew up in homes where there was no model of forgiveness, right? It could have been that something happened, there was an escalation, or someone said something, or there was hurt, and just moments later, things are supposed to be okay. Almost as if nothing happened. That's forgive and forget. And often in churches, we've instructed of forgiveness in the face of great harm that's supposed to say, just forget it, it's done, I'm fine, I forgive you, it's over. And then often these words are actually paired together, forgive and forget, in a way to say that if you have not forgotten, then you must not have forgiven. It's forgive and forget. I know the story of a young girl who had massive harm in her home, abused by her stepdad, and when rumors or whispers of this came out, she was given the opportunity in her home to speak the truth. In a family powwow, was told that she was going to give the chance to speak the truth, and she took the risk, very big risk, to do that with her whole family. And she was told, this didn't happen. And if you think this happened, then you need to forgive this and move on. And then as she grew, can you imagine the wounds, right? And she wants to forgive. She wants to forget this. If you've received great harm, you want to forget this. And what they were telling her in those moments is you need to bury this thing in the darkness instead of speaking the truth. Well, this young girl, she gets older, she comes to a church, right? She gets invited to go out for coffee with women, which is wonderful because she's never had relationships with women, something about how her mother treated her. And they go out to coffee, and in the middle of this coffee shop, they start sharing stories of how they were hurt, harmed, or abused as children. And she's frozen because she can't believe it. It's actually the first time she's ever heard Christians talk about the past. And she's shocked. And she's scared, and she's delighted, and she's not alone. I'll ask people often, there's so many people in the face of great harm that had no model of repair, right? I'll ask people often, well, okay, they'll share something. I'm a counselor, so people share hurts with me, and I'll be like, how did your family fix that? How did they repair from that? And often the answer is, well, we went to bed that night, went to bed, woke up the next morning, continued forward with life. That is forgive and forget. Why is it not forgive and forget? Why not? Because Jesus is about bringing things into the light, not burying them in the darkness. There's this powerful passage in Jeremiah 6. I just don't want to be guilty of this, where God says to the prophets, he accuses them, and this is what he says. He says, they practice deceit. They dress the wounds of my people as if they were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there can be no peace. Forget, no. What does Paul say? He says, forgive as the Lord forgave you. In the scriptures, God constantly calls his people to remember, and even to remember their own sins and how their forefathers turned away from them and what they did specifically to turn away from God. Let's just consider Jesus. That's what Paul says. Consider Jesus, how the Lord forgives. There's a story in Luke 22 where Peter denies Jesus. You always have to just take this in for a minute. Peter deny Jesus. Jesus was betrayed by one of his best friends. It's one of those statements that just you have to kind of sit with. He was betrayed by one of his best friends. Do you know what that would be like? What would that feel like? I know some of you know. And what happens? There's this moment where Peter's questioned 3 times, do you know him? You were with Jesus, and he denies Jesus. And there's verse in verse 60 to 61, it says, and immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed and Jesus turned and he looked at Peter. Do you not sense the intensity of this look? It's a look of acknowledgement. And in fact, even when Peter would turn back, which is an incredibly healing story, Jesus reminds him 3 times of what he did. So I want to do this here. I want to take a minute to do some acknowledgement, okay? Do some acknowledgement. I don't want this to just be information. We have to think of the relationships that are true. This could be true of in our lives. So where you're sitting, and I just want to tell you, I know that this is hard. We're talking about wounds here, and I want to promise you, we're not going to go deep into your story, and I'm going to make it safe. And I'm going to bring us back to the present, okay? But where you're sitting, who for yourself, these are people, real faces, who has caused you harm or affected you with their words, actions, or lack of words and actions? Who have you been hurt by? Who have you felt hurt by? Remember, this is not bitterness, this is truth telling. It's an opportunity to maybe even have real forgiveness. You can write these things down, you can bring these names to mind, but I want to give you a second. Who would this be for you? And this is all of us. My kids can answer this question about me. And then number 2, who have you caused harm or affected with your words, actions, or lack of words and actions? Who might you have hurt? Who might be or have felt hurt by you, for which you would need forgiveness? Take a moment and bring some names to mind. So I know this is hard, but keep these close. Keep these close, because this sermon is all just about, have I experienced this and do I do this with those names? That would be using this, okay? And you're just going to ask, is this me? Have I practiced forgiveness, okay? So forgiveness, if it's not forgetting, what is it? What is it, okay? Number 1 is naming the harm that was done. You cannot forgive what you cannot name, okay? You cannot forgive what you have not named as harmful and wrong. And pause real quick. I'm not saying going to the person. That is a totally different sermon to talk about reconciliation. The question of whether or not you should approach someone with the hope of reconciliation is a totally different sermon. And spoiler, the answer is often no. Reconciliation is a complex process between 2 people. Forgiveness is about you and your heart and Jesus. That's all we're doing. So that's not what I'm asking you to do. Stay here. That's what we're talking about. But the first step is confession. And in the scriptures, the word confession is homo logeo. Homo meaning sameness, okay? Logeo meaning to speak. So to confess is to speak the sameness, to speak sameness with God about that which has actually happened, right? The opposite is denial and minimization. You cannot forgive what you cannot name. Or you find this with ourselves, right? That we won't name wrongdoing. We do this even when we ask for forgiveness, right? Like let's say hypothetically that me and my wife have a fight. Okay, it's never happened. But let's just pretend that happens, okay, one night, and I say something hurtful. Oh no, she's here. Okay, it's gonna get too real. I say something hurtful, and I say something and I wound my wife. Okay, we have an argument. I say hurtful things. Let's say we come down to the kitchen the next morning, and I say nothing. Okay, that is denial and minimization, and it will lead to harm. But let's say I go one step further. Let's say we come down to the kitchen in the morning and I say, I'm sorry about last night. That's a start, right? That's a start, but it still doesn't name what's wrong. What happened? What was hurtful? Let's say I come downstairs and I say, I'm so sorry that last night I said, you always do this and you're like this. That was wrong of me to say. That was hurtful. I shouldn't have said that. I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? Which is more powerful? The real question is which allows for real forgiveness? Because you cannot forgive what you have not named. Confession is just the beginning. Now, is a denial to say, well, my dad wasn't perfect, but I forgive him. But have you named the harm? The reason I'm saying this is because many of us in this room, we go to great lengths to not consider or name the very real harm that's been done to us. We'd rather spend like a night in jail than spend 5 minutes considering the actual hurt that has been caused to our hearts and what happened. You have to name it, and you have to name it too with particularity, okay? You can't forgive your father for hurting you because it's just too abstract, right? That's a generality. All right? You can't, I forgive my father for hurting me. You can forgive your father for getting drunk the day of your graduation and missing the ceremony. You can forgive your mother for talking about your body and saying it was too shapely while you sat at the dinner table with your siblings. You can forgive your sister for stealing from you. You have to name it, but you can't just forgive your mother because she was hurtful. We see this, okay? We see this, God models this over and over again, naming the sins that have happened, okay? You see it with Joseph. Story of Joseph, longest recounted story, longest detailed story of forgiveness in the Bible, Genesis 37 to 50, and his life is ruined, right? He was sold into slavery. He didn't even get a relationship with his father. Those closest to him totally betrayed him. And what happens in Genesis 45 when he reveals himself? He says, it's me, Joseph, the one you sold into slavery. He names it. Can you do this with yourself? Can you say to yourself, I am the one it's me, your wife, the one you said blank to. I'm your son, the one you neglected because you loved work more. I'm your sister, the one that you stole from. First, you have to name it. And the harm is always greater than you think. It's actually greater than you think. But let's just say, I know this is deep. Let's say that you know it, you name it, you consider the real weight of the wound you've been given. If that's true, then how on earth can I forgive? I sit with so many people asking that question. Here it is, we're considering it. Now, how do I heal? That's what I want to fill in for us today. Number 3, forgiveness is releasing what is owed to me. Peter brings this question to Jesus in Matthew 18. He asks, how many times am I supposed to forgive someone? Forgive my brother. Is it 7? And Jesus says, what does he say? Yeah, he says 7 times 70, right? Which is a way of saying over and over and over again, okay? Nonstop, never ending, okay? This is the kind of answer that demands an objection. Can we just throw some of those out? What kind of objections could be thrown out in the face of Jesus saying this? Tell me. They're not really sorry. Thank you. What else?
They'll do it again.
They'll do it again. Thank you. Let's keep going. That's abusive. That's exhausting. How about just, that's impossible? They don't deserve it. Thank you. They will not change. Jesus anticipates all these and more. And he tells a story to answer them, okay, in Matthew 18. And I'm going to paraphrase because I can't tell the whole thing. But in Matthew 18, he tells the story of a king who's collecting his debts. At the core understanding of forgiveness is that a debt is owed. And here's this king who's calling in his debts. And a servant comes forward who has a debt that will never be repaid. In fact, the amount translated to current day is about $900 billion. That's how big his debt is. And the king says, you are going to be a slave, and your family, your wife and children are going to be slaves until you can pay this back. And he pleads with him. He actually says, be patient with me. I will repay you everything. Which is kind of a joke. If you were there, you might even laugh, because there's a minimum wage worker saying, I'll pay back that $900 billion loan. But that's what he says. And what happens? The master of that servant had compassion on him, and he released him from the loan, which is amazing. Can you imagine what it'd be like to be given your family back to you? To have a debt released that big. You cannot imagine emotionally what that would be like, to be given a whole new life, given your life back. And then what happens? The servant goes out and he finds one of his servants that owes him money, and he demands that he pay it back. And he says the same line, be patient with me. I'll pay you back everything. And it says he was not willing, and he throws him in jail. Well, when the king hears about this, he comes back with full anger and retribution. And he tells him, should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And his wrath is terrible. Okay? To forgive a debt is to release someone of what they're owed. What it means not punishing him. This is how Tim Keller says it. Forgiveness means bearing the cost instead of making the wrongdoer bear it, so that you can reach out in love and seek your enemy's renewal and change. When you think about that list of names, what would it be like to release them? It would mean not punishing them. Have you punished them with inward hate or with outward violence or with gossip or with your own rage? Have you retaliated? This isn't meant to be easy. Forgiveness, if it's a debt, it means you're owed it. You are owed something. This shouldn't have happened. This is how our friend Dr. Gary Bashir says it. Forgiveness is my personal act to release the one who sinned against me for my personal right to collect on the moral debt, that is to pay them back for their offense. Instead of giving back the pain they gave me, I absorb the pain into myself with God's help. How on earth? Now, I sat with people, right? And they've just asked, how on earth do I do this? Let's keep going. Okay, number 4, by acknowledging my own debt and the goodness of God towards me. This story of Joseph and the story that Jesus, right, that Jesus actually depicts in Matthew 18 is the kind of story that you as a person and us as Christians are supposed to go, oh my gosh, that's my story. Do you remember the sweetness of having the forgiveness of God? If you believe you are chosen, holy, and dearly loved, does that give you more compassion or less? It's meant to be our story. We had the mountain of debt that would never be repaid. I'll often just ask people in the face of this, and it's not just like a trick. I'm not trying to turn things back on them. I'll be like, hey, can you tell me about how you came to know Jesus as your Savior? Because God says that's the place of compassion. That's the place that you can have compassion. And if that's true, if you know desperately your need for Jesus every day, how I needed him this week, if you know that, then forgiveness is highly a matter of saying, me too. Oh, you hurt people? Me too. Oh, you have used people? Me too. Oh, you desperately need Jesus? Me too. I just need to say before moving forward, this sermon, I was really in danger of being an imposter this week, okay? Emotionally, in some ways, I've sat with lots of people as a counselor working through forgiveness, but in other ways, emotionally, to consider this personally for myself this week, I've had to ask my kids for forgiveness. This week, I've had a very real conversation with my wife saying, I'm so sorry that this hasn't changed. I know this is like the 8th to 10th time that we're having this conversation. I'm so sorry. And I've had to consider the very real harm that I have done to others. That's so heavy, but God says they have to go together. You have to hold them together in order to have compassion for those that have hurt you. Are you closely connected to your deep need for Jesus? And then lastly, forgiveness is following after Jesus, continually refocusing the posture of your heart towards the person. Just a few chapters later, Jesus has been condemned to death, okay? He's been condemned to death, and the men around him are actually divvying up his belongings to each other. What he has, what belongs to him, his money. And you can feel the callousness, the dehumanization, the lack of understanding of human sanctity as they're doing this. And Jesus, who is totally innocent, has been condemned to death. And how does Jesus respond? These are actually his executioners. And how does he respond? Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Jesus is our powerful model. He did it. He shows us how to do it. It's him. And continually refocusing the posture of your heart towards the other person. In other words, repeat. Why does it require repeating? Because forgiveness it's a process, it's ongoing. Dan Allender says it this way: forgiveness is not a snapshot, it's not a photograph, it's a movie. Why is it a process? Why it is ongoing? Because most likely a year from now, you're gonna understand more about the pain you've received, about that wound. You'll actually understand the pain more and the implications of it, which means at that time, it will require deeper levels of forgiveness, new levels of forgiveness. That's why forgiveness cannot be a 2.5-second thing where you bring someone to mind and say, I forgive them, and push it away. It's ongoing. It requires you to keep doing it. I'm going to wrap up this passage. Verse 14, this is what Paul says. Over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. The way of Jesus somehow receives pain from people and gives back love. It's not forgive and forget. It's forgive and remember, and it's forgive and redeem. Somehow to receive pain and give back love. Ronald Rolheiser says it this way: any pain or tension that we do not transform, we will transmit. which means it'll come out. It'll come out into your children. It'll come out into your relationship. It'll come out into your moments when you're alone. It'll bring even more distance between you and others. What we do not transform, we will transmit. In the face of jealousy, anger, bitterness, and hatred, we must be like water purifiers, holding the poisons and toxins inside and giving back only the pure water, rather than being like electrical cords that simply pass on energy that rolls through them. This is something Jesus models and teaches: sacrificial love towards those who are even your enemies. I just want to tell you this, that I've seen this. That it's true, that it happens, right? Moments when I'm sitting with people and I don't even get it, right? As a counselor, I'm like, how could you have gentleness, kindness, compassion? How could you have forgiveness for that person who did that? Even I'm amazed. I've sat with a young woman who should not have conversations with her former stepdad say, I've named the harm. It's greater than I ever thought it was. And because of Jesus, I'm continually forgiving him and releasing him of the debt that I am owed. I've sat with married couples who, after the greatest heartbreak and betrayal, achieved not just forgiveness, but closeness, okay? Because forgiveness drew them close, not to just each other, right, but Jesus. And the other spouse is able to not say, you're a monster, but say, me too. I desperately need Jesus too. I've sat with friends from Reese Church here who felt deeply hurt by one another and find compassion through tears of personal pain. The application for this is really easy, right? The names that you brought to mind, not easy. It's easy. It's not easy. It's simple. It's have I forgiven? If this is forgiveness, have I done it? It's not easy. It requires Jesus. But for those that have harmed us, those names that you brought to mind, are you forgiving them? Have you named the harm that's been done, which is probably greater than you think? That might take exploring. I want to encourage you, that would be something to explore in community, with people, not alone. Okay, that's what's happening today, right? The Tri-Softer groups and the Unwanted groups, those are people who are specifically naming their story. They're not just pushing it into the darkness. Have you named it specifically? 3, have you released them of what they've owed you by not retaliating, inwardly or outwardly, by punishing them? Number 4, have you acknowledged your own debt and the goodness of God towards you as you think about this hurt? And number 5, are you continuing to refocus your heart, following after Jesus towards this other person? Now, I want to say this before I end. There are people listening to this sermon, and you're saying, I'm the one who's harmed, right? That this is a terrible weight to bear because you're thinking of the harm I've caused is so great. And that can be so hard because you cannot control what happens in the person you've hurt. And you can't actually even bring them to give forgiveness to you. That's something you're gonna have to entrust to Jesus. But I also wanna say this, that there's probably people in your life that you can even just ask that question. Is there any way that I've harmed you? Right? That's such a brave question to ask. Is there some way that I've harmed you, which we've not named, for which I could ask for your forgiveness? That would be a wonderful start. 2 final comments, okay? This is not exhaustive. Forgiveness is ongoing process, complex, nuanced, all right? And number 2, it's not about reconciliation, okay? That's a totally different sermon of whether or not you should approach that person, okay? Now, as we transition to worship, I just want to invite the band forward at this point. I want to read just the rest of this passage, and I want to ground us. This is to consider with the things I've asked you. I've even maybe these names, these faces. There's likely memories. There might even be a lot of discomfort in the room. I've kind of brought you into the past a bit, all right? I want to bring us back to the present, all right? Anxiety is often a grappling for, all right, what we cannot control in the future or the past. I want to read this because I think even the end of this passage is for us to come back to the present. Paul says this. He says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. And be thankful. He's going to say this over and over again, that peace and thankfulness somehow go together. That somehow if you can practice thankfulness, that what you'll get back is actual peace. And he'll say it again 2 more times. Let the message of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, songs from the Spirit, singing God with what? With gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. What he's saying is somehow there's a practice of thankfulness that leads to peace. If anxiety is grasping for control in the present or the past, to have thankfulness is to remember what I do have right now in the present. So that's what I want to invite you to, is to come to the present by doing this. Answering this question. What can you be thankful for in your life right now that you can say, thank you, Jesus, that I have this? And allow yourself to come back to the present with that. What in your life can you say, for that I know I am thankful? God says that every gift is from him. Every good gift in your life is from him. And as you come back to the present, that's going to be our reason to worship. That he has forgiven the debt, but also whatever you're holding and have come up with. I want that to be a reason for you to have peace right now, to be centered and to worship. Jesus, I pray for us. Would you help our hearts with real wounds that we will not ignore and push into the darkness and bury? Help us to know and believe that we can have forgiveness, that there can be healing for deep hurts, to remember our story. And will you help us be thankful right now that could be the emotion that we can leave with, a thankfulness that leads to real peace, Jesus. Yeah, I pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.